Hey everybody, thank you for joining me again today for another episode of the podcast. I've brought you outside to a local hilltop. I struggled to find a suitable composition to frame up the light. Is kind of not optimal, so you've had to make do with me sat in a field. So sorry I couldn't bring you a little bit more aesthetic for anybody who's watching along with me on YouTube. For those on the podcast, Spotify app, of course, that doesn't matter at all because you can just hear me. So I hope this sounds nice and high quality. I'm sure you can just about hear some church bells ringing out in the background. And hopefully we'll get some bird song, some sounds of nature, maybe some grasshoppers, crickets, or something to keep us company today. Otherwise, it's just the sound of me. And on today's episode, I want to talk about authenticity, because this is something that has been on my mind a lot recently since I put more of myself out on video. I've had some messages and conversations really about how authentic I seem when I'm speaking. So I thought today would be a great opportunity to talk a little bit about that, seeing as I was sat in a meditation this morning and that word kept coming to me. Authenticity kept dropping in like a little nugget into my head, and anytime I cleared my mind and stopped thinking, authenticity came into mind. So that was the universe's way of, giving me a little bit of a hint as to what I should talk about today. So we'll begin. I'll start with a little bit about my quest for authenticity. Of course, as many of you will know, if you've been listening to me or following me for a while, you'll know that I began my search for my authenticity, so myself, my authentic self, my truth, who I am or who I'm not, about 5.5 years ago now. So actually, I brought some props with me for those people who are watching. So in my bag beside me, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 of my journals, if you can see those. So 16 journals full of me writing down my thoughts, and that process began 6 years ago. I haven't been writing consistently for 6 years, so I'd probably say most of those have been filled up in the past 2, maybe 3 years. The first part of my journaling practice began back in 2018. Was very lost in life, as you might know if you listened to the previous episode, which was a bit about my why. So I was very lost, and I had a job I didn't want to work anymore, and a girl had called off our relationship, and I was at a loose end, and I was thinking, what am I going to do? I didn't really like the version of me it's not like I didn't like it, but I knew I was called for more. So the version of me that existed back then was lacking in lots of ambition and drive and determination, and had no real idea of what his purpose was. So I sat down one day with the help of some podcasts or some YouTube videos, and I basically designed myself, and I said, this is what I am, this is what I want to be. So that character included, he was based on a superhero. I think the video that I watched that inspired me was something like, be your own superhero in this life. So that's what I did. I sat and I wrote down all of the characteristics, all of the traits that I wanted to possess. Lots of them, of course: ambition, drive, patient, consistent, business minded. I wanted some businesses. I didn't know what in, of course. I was lacking direction and didn't know myself. So that really was the catalyst for my quest for myself. I didn't know it at the time. I just did what felt good. I did what was in my heart, and of course, in hindsight, that was my soul beating at my chest, trying to be heard. I was very kind of unconscious and asleep back then, and I was just on autopilot going through life. And of course, that's not what any of us are here to do. We're here to achieve, to find, who we are, and to do things, to be creative, I believe. And to be creative, that is a process in itself, and I think that being creative needs us to be authentic if we're to make it, okay? And be anybody in the creative world and to have a say. I say make it. What does make it actually mean? But if we're to, speak our truth, then yeah, it requires a sense of authenticity. So that sparked my journey back then, and since that day, really, I've been sat journaling, writing as myself. Lots of things about who I want to be, as well as things about, who I have been that perhaps weren't me. So I think we're all born with a unique purpose in life, with our soul, whatever you want to call it, is pulling us to do something. As we go through different stages of life, we perhaps are pulled away from that truth, that sense of truth that exists in all of us. So I think that thing, whatever that thing is whatever we're drawn to. So for me, I remember being maybe 2 or 3 years old, and all I wanted to do was read books. My mum tells me that I was ahead of my class when I went to school because of the 3 or 4 years building up to that were me reading. And I loved stories. I loved looking at the pictures in encyclopedias and reading the kind of words that I could understand back then. So for me, that is linked to my truth, because it's what me in my purest form as a child, as a toddler, before I could really understand language, I guess, and people who would maybe pull me away from that side of myself by the words they would speak, which I remember being having quite a difficult time with my stepfathers, 2 of my stepfathers, who didn't really like the kind of boy that I was. They wanted a man, somebody tough and strong and bulletproof, emotionless, because that's exactly what they appeared to be. Although deep down inside, I think we're all sensitive beings. But they lost that side of themselves, obviously, at a young age. And so they tried to take it out of me and steer me in a different direction. And a lot of my ways of being, my sensitivity, my softness, my emotions, they were kind of met with a lot of shame and ridicule, really. And I remember at around about the age of 4, something significant happened, and I remember turning basically a 180 degree turn away from those things that I love to do. And it's a memory that is very kind of vivid in my mind. And when I'm doing some kinds of meditation sometimes, and I go to some sound healing every now and then, that memory always replays in my mind. It's like it transports me back to that time, because it's kind of speaking to me and saying, this maybe how I perceived it, that was the moment that I turned away from myself, my sense of true authenticity. And I remember masking lots of my emotions while I grew up, and I didn't want the world to know that I was this sensitive and soft being, because that was met with shame, ridicule, and a lot of insults from these men that were, supposed to be my guardians and caregivers. So, of course, I seeked approval from them, and anything that, gained the opposite steered me away from what it was that I wanted, that I was at my core. So for me now to have embarked on this creative quest, this journey of my own, it really has sent me back to those periods in my life where I remember being that boy and how much joy it brought me, and I guess things throughout teenage years and early adult years where I'd acted very inauthentically, and I'd maybe tried to be and mirror people that I wasn't, and I wanted to be like them to fit in and to gain approval and to be respected, because my nature didn't gain much respect when I was young. So for me, the quest for authenticity has been to return to that truest form of myself. And I love myself now. I love that side of me, and the people around me love that side of me, because it's me. And what else is there that we can really be in this life but ourselves? I have a quote here from one of my favourite writers, which is Henry David Thoreau. So, be yourself, not your idea of what you think somebody else's idea of yourself should be. And I think for a long time I was living with this idea of what I thought I should be. And the whole creative process has been a journey of kind of self-discovery, if you like, or self-creation, I guess. It's been a process of tapping into whatever's in here in my subconscious to go where I feel drawn to take the photos that I feel drawn to. If you notice with my photography, a lot of the photos tend to follow a similar style, and it's my hope that they represent who I am. I've always been a fairly quiet and introspective, I guess shy person, and I like to think that my photographs represent that and maybe show that I'm an introspective, thoughtful, meticulous person. And that has been a journey in itself to get to that point. And I think from a personal standpoint, that's what any artist should be looking to do, whether it's through music, through painting, through photographs, through writing. I mean, mine has been a process of writing and photography. The writing actually came first, but the photography is when things really stepped up, because I started to act more impulsively and maybe without too much thought. So I was acting on impulse rather than sitting and actually thinking. And I think that's where, for me, my self has been able to shine through. So there's been a journey of, in the beginning of the photography kind of stage, I would take photographs of all sorts of things. I mean, there was no formula. There was, of course, me going to some of the popular spots, which I think, everybody does in the beginning stages of their, photography adventures. I would go and take lots of the cliche shots without really thinking too much in the way of, style or what I'm trying to communicate. It was just a picture of a place. And then quickly those got very boring for me, and I wanted to put a little bit of a different spin on those popular spots. So I started to, get a little bit lower, use a wider lens, maybe try some longer focal lengths as well, and longer shutter speeds and all sorts of things, just to be curious. That boy that I talked about before, he was also incredibly curious. So that's what I began to do with the camera, and I experimented and explored, and some of those photos began to look like me, I think. Maybe softer, gentle, and more thought-inspired. So for me, that's been the most beautiful part of the photography for personal growth and development. And I think that's what we should all be seeking in some ways. I mean, maybe you don't have to be as thoughtful and reflective as me. Maybe you just love to take photographs, but I'm in this for a different reason, and I think I love to learn about myself and figure myself out. So yeah, that's what the camera has been for me, and I look forward to seeing where it leads in the future, as well as the written word. The photographs will continue to evolve, although I'm on a little bit of a creative break from photography just at the moment, as I try and kind of dig a little bit deeper into my current portfolio and learn a little bit about myself and what those photographs mean. So part of that reflective process has also been to learn about nature and what nature means for me as well. And I think there are words that I have managed to identify, things like stillness, things like reflection, serene, tranquil, healing, sanctuary. There's all of these kind of words that are associated with my portfolio now, which represent me as a person and as an artist, and really give me something to work with now as I continue to search for the truth behind why I do what I do. So now I'd just like to read you a little bit of something that I prepared. I have got a few show notes, although I had great feedback last time on the episode where I spoke just off the cuff and from the heart, so I've tried the same approach today, although it seems to have been maybe a little bit more stop-start, but I'm sure it will get better with time. This is a very different episode, to the last one, and maybe certain episodes need just a little bit of structure. So I'm just going to resort to my notes, because I had a comment from a follower recently who was just maybe surprised, or just it respected how I could talk so openly, and he mentioned something, how do you find the bravery to talk in such a way? I'd be terrified of the self-doubt that follows afterwards. And I was reading a book that I got handed today called The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield, and I flicked to a page that had the following written in it. The amateur believes he must first overcome his fear, then he can do his work. The professional knows that fear can never be overcome. He knows that there is no such thing as a fearless warrior or a dread-free artist. So for me, it's a case of I kind of have to talk about these things that are on my heart and on my mind, and have been ever since I was young. I mentioned a little bit, I think, in the last episode about my why and my fuel. So I guess I have no choice but to be authentic. For a long time I kept, like I mentioned before, many sides of myself hidden from the world, including my emotion and sensitivity and my softness and just my curiosity. The world tries to beat that stuff out of us and toughen us up, but I actually refuse to harden when things happen in my life. I think I'm being drawn to choose a different approach and to embrace this softer side of myself, because I think softness and sensitivity and emotion can make a huge difference in the world. And it only takes for you to turn on a news channel these days or open a newspaper and you just see hatred, negativity, drama, and I think what people need is a little bit of love and a little bit of softness and a little bit of sensitivity. I'm sure there wouldn't be half the problems in the world now if people just chose to show some love and understanding with each other. So from my point of view, I have to do this. I have to put myself out there and I have to talk in this way. I feel great every time I do, because I feel like I'm facing a lot of those trials, refacing them now with a sword and a spear. Those trials that I faced when I was a child, and maybe I crumbled when I got faced with this negativity and criticism and shame, and I was just a little boy, so I wouldn't know how to react, and I just listened and maybe bowed. But now this is my way of running back towards those events and slaying them. So yeah, I hope maybe you can take something from what I'm saying right now. I don't know, maybe it's just personal to me, and I'd love to hear if you have any thoughts that come from what I'm talking about. Yeah, so here's another from the book The War of Art that really invoked some thought on my part earlier this afternoon. We come into this world with a specific personal destiny. We have a job to do, a calling to enact, a self to become. We are who we are from the cradle, and we're stuck with it. Our job in this lifetime is not to shape ourselves into some ideal we imagine we ought to be, but to find out who we already are and become it. If we were born to paint, it's our job to become a painter. If we were born to raise and nurture children, it's our job to become a mother. If we were born to overthrow the order of ignorance and injustice of the world, it's our job to realize it and get down to business. So, with that in mind, I guess I ask you what it is that you were born to do. I believe that I was born to create and to become more conscious, more aware in the way that I have been over the past 5 or 6 years, and I have the camera to thank for that. I have creativity, I have whatever this thing is outside of me to thank, because I don't really believe that it actually comes from within myself, this ego, this thing, this body. I think it is all around us, and I've just been a conduit and allowed whatever it is to flow through me. And I do think it's out there for everybody to find as well, and I would love to be somebody who can inspire others to do that. So there's my question for you today. What is it that you were born to do? And with that, maybe you could reflect on what you were drawn to as a young child, age of 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe. But I think by the age of 4, 5, then we take too much on board from the outside world, and we adopt other people's beliefs and limits, and something I definitely did throughout my entire life, really, until recently, when the bodybuilding journey, the photography journey has instilled in me a confidence and a belief in myself that I know what I need to be doing. It's in me, it's in my feelings, it's in my impulse, it's in my intuition, the things that make me curious. So yeah, there's my thoughts on authenticity. And do get in touch, do send me some messages, because honestly they help to keep me going. They help to inspire me to know that people actually give a hoot what I'm talking about. It's very nice to know, because I once felt like nobody really cared. It's just, a case of I went with the flow and followed the crowd, and now I'm stepping out and putting my head up, ready to be shot at if needs be. So do shoot me down if you think I'm talking a load of nonsense. Whether I listen to you, well, that's another story altogether. But no, I'd love to hear some thoughts. So thank you for listening.